Evening, everyone. So, Donald Trump's little clashes with reality. So, I want to talk about a couple of things. I did want to talk about what's happened as a result of the Texan floods, but as a lot of people are discussing tariffs in the chat, and I want to talk about that as well. And of course, just like very recently, as I was getting ready for the stream, Trump has announced that there's going to be 30% tariffs on Mexico and the EU on the 1st of August. And there's a question there about how long, well, first of all, like how long for this time, given a lot of food in the USA comes from Mexico. Let us remember, so at the moment, in terms of his last few days he's sending letters all over the place, right, to different countries. And it all seems fairly chaotic. We don't know that there will be any extra tariffs placed on Canada, Mexico, or the EU for any period of time, or indeed anyone else he's threatening. But yes, applying 30% tariffs to Mexico and the EU and 35% tariffs to Canada, if he applies them exactly as we're supposed to think he's applying them, then yes, that would be incredibly damaging for the US economy, incredibly damaging for the cost of living of ordinary Americans. So there's several possibilities here. The first is that Donald Trump has absolutely no intention of imposing any of these tariffs. He's doing it because he expects, if you look at the EU's reaction, for example, the EU haven't come straight out and said, well, we're just going to slap retaliatory tariffs. Now, Trump, by the way, has said, if you retaliate, I'm going to raise the tariffs to 30% on top of whatever you do. So in other words, let's say the EU applied 20% tariffs to EU goods, which is not how they work, by the way. They will target specific products. But in theory, if they raise them to 20%, Trump will raise his to 50%. If they raise them to 60%, he'll raise them to 90% and so on. So it ends up being like with China. And we know how that went. But there's a very strong chance that Trump, because if you look at what his issues are, they're all really nebulous. He's not saying he's applying these tariffs because of this thing that the others aren't agreeing to. It's all very nebulous. Like he said to Mexico, oh, I accept that you've done a lot of work on the border thing, but it's not enough. So he's not being specific about what he wants, which gives him the room, if he can announce in the next couple of weeks a trade deal with Canada, Mexico and the EU to go, oh, my threat worked. So it is entirely possible that these latest tariffs are not really tariffs at all, that he's not going to do them, and that he's just saying it because he knows he's quite close to a deal with them. And that would also explain why the EU at the moment are not hardening their attitude towards the US. Because I would find it very difficult to believe that the EU, if Donald Trump actually imposed 30% tariffs on the 1st of August, I find it difficult to believe the EU won't retaliate. Now, they let him get away with the 10% because it's not that big. It's obviously going to be important for some industries, but for the EU as a whole, it wasn't considered that big a deal. But much more than that will be significantly more. But and then there was a question about, so once Trump's had his state visit here in Britain, which is later this year, he's not going to be talking to Parliament, it seems, which I think was expected anyway. Who'd want to listen to him? And but admittedly, it might have been the sort of thing Trump wanted to do, given that Macron, that was a bit, I thought that was a little bit risky as it happens, inviting Macron over and getting him to address Parliament, which, went down very well, don't get me wrong. MPs, by and large, enjoyed it and valued it. But it almost seemed to me that Trump, who might not have cared about addressing Parliament, might go, well, hang on a minute. If Emmanuel got to address them, why can't I? But anyway, he's not going to. He's just going to Scotland to annoy people there. In fact, he's in Scotland. Is he in Scotland at the moment, or is he in Scotland roundabout now? He's supposed to be visiting Scotland for his golf course, and that's not related to the state visit. But anyway, so there was a question about, so once he's had his state visit and he's got from us what he wants, will he then whack up tariffs on us? And what I would say is, I don't think so. Now, obviously, you can't really predict with any great accuracy what Donald Trump may or may not do. He's a lunatic, right? He's a very not clever lunatic, deeply stupid, brains deteriorating, and he just has no connection with reality or capacity to learn, it seems. But I don't think so. And the reason I will say I don't think so is, first of all, Trump clearly learned that his tariffs don't work the way he thought they was. I'm not saying he's a reformed character, but he massively backed down to China. Although I know he's talking a big game on expanding these tariffs. It's like 24 countries are going to raise tariffs on the 1st of August, right? I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I would be very surprised if Trump raises tariffs significantly on major markets. Now, obviously, America has some trade with some countries where it can probably get away with, if he wanted to make a big song and dance about it, he could get away with screwing them over without knackering the US economy. Or remember, cost of living for Americans. Because, remember how, let's just think how this works. I looked up some figures here, right? So, at the moment, the effective tariff rate, now when I say the effective tariff rate, I don't mean, because remember, some of the tariffs, there's exemptions and stuff like this. But according to economists, the effective tariff rate on the US right now that they're applying to imports from elsewhere, so basically their own stuff coming in, has more than doubled compared with when Trump took over. It's gone from something like 10% to 23%, right? So he's more than doubled the tariffs. Now, this extra is reportedly bringing in about $400 billion. Now, that is $400 billion that is being paid by the US consumer, by the way. Americans. That's not paid externally. If any exporters are absorbing any of the tariffs at all and the only way they can absorb it, remember, is by lowering their own costs, because they do not pay the tariffs. The tariffs are paid in the United States. No tariff is due until a product has physically made it into the United States, at which point it's Americans that are paying for it. But let us say, to remain competitive, some exporters reduce their prices effectively for America. That's not including the $400 billion. So it might be raising an extra $400 billion, but just to put that into context, the tax revenues, the latest annual tax revenues for the United States, I believe, are just under $5 trillion. So it's not exactly compensating for the other taxes. But then you also think about this. So American consumers are paying those tariffs. So that means the costs of their goods go up. But because of this trade war, the dollar has gone down in value since the start of the year. The dollar's on a proper slide, right? So that means that's okay for exporters because you can sell your stuff more competitively, but not all exporters, because some exporters need to import materials to use and they've got tariffs and they've got a weaker dollar to buy. But anyone buying imports is paying more for them because of the lower the lower dollar against the pound and the euro and pretty much everything else. So they're paying more for their imports. So the cost of living for Americans goes up two ways. First of all, the tariffs. Second of all, the higher cost of the imports. And remember, a particular percentage tariff. So, in fact, I'm just going to have a quick look at how it's done specifically against the Canadian dollar. Let's just have a little look here. So, the US dollar is down on the Canadian dollar as well, right? So, you apply 35% tariffs to Canadian imports. That means you are, for your fuel, for example, the oil that they need from Canada, assuming he applies it to that, you've got, you're paying more because the dollar's weaker, because Canada's selling it for the same amount of Canadian dollars, but that's now more US dollars, so you're paying a higher price. But then if you add 35% on top of it, so 35% is a hell of a tariff rate on it, right? A hell of an import tax. But if you're having to pay more US dollars, it's proportionally more still. So you're getting double hit. If Trump thinks he can dismantle democracy, then why would he care about the cost of living for voters? Because he's not going to turn America into a literal dictatorship in the next year and a half. I mean, he's moved very rapidly. His aim to begin with will be, just like Putin, to win power democratically, but, you know, stacking the odds in his favour. But if he creates such dissatisfaction amongst the public, then even shifting the dial in favour of the Republicans can still mean he loses really badly in the midterms. And if he loses control of Congress, if he loses control of, say, both houses, you know, that's it. His wings are clipped. He'll still have the Supreme Court on his side, but his wings are clipped. Effectively, if he has Congress acting in unison against him, and the thing is, like, you know, if the Democrats get control, majority, they don't need a huge majority, because all Democrats will be against the most extreme of Trump's policies. Like, it is possible for Trump, you know, to try and pass some legislation that by and large isn't supported by the Democrats, but maybe you can get a few of them on his side. But, you know, what he's doing, they're not going to stand for that. None of them will, not a single one. And again, if Elon Musk gets involved, you never know, he could tip the balance a little bit. So there we go. Emma, they're saying tariffs are a means of redistributing wealth from people of ordinary means to the super rich who get tax cuts they do not even need. Well, in this particular case, it's literally acting like that, except the tariffs, because he's not even offering much in terms of carve-outs. But yeah, so, I mean, these tariffs, the 30% on the EU, the 30% on Mexico, the 35% on Canada, I don't see it. Like, first of all, I think that's why we haven't seen, and I haven't seen Mexico's reaction yet. But the Canadian and EU reaction has been quite muted. Now, bear in mind, when Trump was first going for his tariffs, both Canada, I know they had a different prime minister, but Carney is in the same party and stood on a platform of standing up to Trump, right? And the EU both talked tough on counter tariffs, right? And yet neither of them are doing that at the moment. And it's not because they've been cowed. It's because they're just thinking to themselves, I think they're thinking he's just doing it for show. It's for his own audience, so that come sometime later this month, he announces these deals, and then he gets to say it's because I talked tough. It's because I acted tough that I got these deals. That's what it'll be. And as long as Canada and the EU can live with it, because they know he's insane, they, you know, I think they can both live with trade on slightly worse terms than at the start of the year. The UK is, we are. I mean, although we've got this deal, this tariff deal with the US, with Trump, it still puts us on worse terms than we had at the start of the year. But it's only slightly worse terms. We're not that bothered. So the same, I think, will be true of Canada and the EU. The man's a lunatic. They're not going to pick a fight just for the hell of it, because he is. I mean, you don't pick a fight with a. I mean, he's stupid and he's mad. No connection with reality, like I say. So they won't at all. But at the same time, I also think that Trump learned a lesson from China. He still wants his tariffs. That's clear. He's not giving up on them. But he also knows that they're going to be very damaging to the economy. And the thing is, that's going to turn so many people against him. I mean, if you imagine it, 35% tariffs on Canadian imports, 30% on Mexican and EU imports. That's a massive amount of their imports. I mean, Canadian imports account for, I looked up, that's about 11% of all their imports. Let me just have a little look here. Just have a look for the EU. So it's about 13% for the EU. And let's see Mexico. So it's 24% so far. 15%. So it's basically about 40%, 39% of all American imports. And that includes some really crucial stuff. Food, oil, machinery, stuff like that. You know, some raw materials as well, metals and so on. So critical product. We're not talking luxury. I mean, there are some luxuries in there as well. But critical products for the US, 39% of them come from Mexico, the EU, and Canada. The idea of him putting 30 to 35% tariffs on them just sounds batshit. And I know he is batshit, but I don't think he can be that crazy. But there we go. The issue over the missing Epstein client list is what is looking to drive the wedge between Trump and MAGA. Yeah, that is, yeah. I mean, that is an interesting one. Yeah. Because the thing is, I don't actually understand why he didn't just publish it. Because it's like, oh, it's because his name's on it, Phil. Does he care? I mean, he obviously does care because he's not publishing it. But why does he care? This man has been convicted of dozens of felonies. He got caught with confidential papers boxed up in a toilet that was accessible by anyone that was at Mar-a-Lago, like basic members of the public. You know what? He was on television talking about, sat next to his teenage daughter, saying he wanted to bang her, for Christ's sake. This man has no shame. Like, I would have expected Trump. He is, I mean, his name almost certainly is on the list. I mean, no one believes it's not. I would have expected him to just publish it. And see, the thing is, if he'd have published it straight away, right, he's come in on this high, he's getting all these executive orders done. He could have just buried it in the news of all that, all these things he was going to do. And all he would have to say is, yeah, I was on the list. I didn't know it was a non-silent. That's all he had to say. You know. But anyway. Anne's just saying there, you can turn the crowns off in the settings if it gets annoying. How can crowns be annoying? Anyway. Trump is now at the stage of the story, the boy who cried wolf, where no one believes the wolf is there. Well, this is another issue as well. So his supporters do. That's why I think this boasting about the 30%, 35% tariffs, I think it's just for his supporters. I think he's already basically agreed the terms. I think they're just finalising things. I'd be very surprised if that's not the case. I would be very surprised if any, I'm not saying there won't be any enhanced tariffs on the 1st of August. I think there will be. But I would be very surprised if they're applied to major markets. You notice he's not threatening China. He's not saying anything about China at the moment. Has he said anything about China for like 2 months? I've not heard anything. And so, you know, China's cowed him, basically. Yes, the tariffs on China are higher than they were at the start of the year. But China's also got some benefit out of it. They got something that they didn't have at the start of the year as well, in terms of like chips. So they should be able to start buying some chips that the US had previously blocked, because they're, as far as I know anyway, there's a lot of secrecy around exactly what the deal with China was. And that's another thing with these tariffs. Like, we're talking about 30% tariffs on the EU and 30% on Mexico and 35% on Canada. But we don't know that. Like, is that 30% baseline, but he's going to have loads of carve-outs? Because he doesn't want oil being 35% more expensive. I mean, remember, how much do they, it's about 40% of their oil. And remember, you can't just get oil from different places. Like, there's different grades of oil, there's different types of oil. So the oil they get from Canada they need, they can't really source it from anywhere else. So about 40% of their oil's from Canada, and they can't really replace that source. MZ saying rare earth minerals. China has those. China was holding that over the US. No, it's the actual chips. So America produces advanced chips that China would like. America was restricting sales of them because of their military applications. They don't really want China building up a more advanced military. Particularly as there is the very... If China ever thinks it can get away with it, it's absolutely going to invade Taiwan. We know that. So, no, it was access to these chips. There was a belief, I'm not 100% on it because I'm not sure that we know the details, but a deal was reached and there was a suggestion that it might allow China to buy those chips. How much of Trump's administration is actually Trump and how much is just his oligarchy pulling the strings and letting his brain rot until he needs his campaign again? It's a good question. It's very difficult to know. There clearly are. It is oligarchy. I mean, that's quite clear. Some of them are just people who just backed him to the hill because some of them are completely out their depth. Hegseth, for example, has no idea. He was just a mad Trump supporter. JFK Jr., RFK Jr., sorry, he just got a deal because Trump wanted him to stand down because he would hide votes away. So he just let him run the health department in order for standing down, to basically stand down. So there are some in there that are not necessarily trying to sort of steer Trump in different directions. They're just doing their own thing. But some of them inevitably, yes, will have a grander agenda. Excuse me. Yeah, who's popping there saying, we know Hegseth has been making decisions on Ukrainian aid without Trump oversight. Yeah, I think he got, I don't know whether he got a formal telling off about that, but the fact that Trump reversed the decision once it was highlighted speaks volumes on that one. So Hegseth was very much undermined there. You say we can import oil from OPEC because it's cheaper, even with tariffs on Canada's oil, still cheaper than what we said. Remember, there's different types of oil. You can't just buy oil. There's different types for different purposes. But there we go. But also, let's have a little talk about, because I mean, that's tariff. The tariffs, as I say, if I go back to finish off my thing about the UK, why I don't think, again, he can do anything, but why I don't think he'll impose massive tariffs on the UK. First of all, we are, remember, one of the countries where he accepts that we haven't, in his words, like the EU, Mexico, Canada have been taking advantage of America. He doesn't view the UK in those terms, a bit like Australia, there's a few others. Penguin Island, for example. So he doesn't view us as having taken advantage. We have persuaded him that in actual fact, the trade is very much in the US favour, or at least balanced, right? So he has no reason to impose them based on his crayon maths. The second thing is, we have, so far, I mean, we do not know what's said behind closed doors. But so far, it sounds like Starmer and his own negotiating team have been treading the line pretty well. So this line to tread with Trump this is what we're told by people close to him. First of all, you have to stand up to him. So it could be, now I don't know this for a fact, by the way, but it could be argued that maybe he's going a bit harder on Canada at the moment, or pretending, he may be just pretending. Was it wise for Carney to back down the digital services tax? It's like we are told you have to stand up to him a bit, but you don't stand up to him and stick two fingers up at him. So there's a line to be trod between being his ally, being his friend, being on his side, agreeing with him, but not letting him think you're an easy touch. So far, we seem to have been treading that line pretty well, which is remarkable for a new government. So that also seems to be working out well. And the other thing, as I say, is there's no like the tariffs are all very damaging. Every country he raises tariffs on is damaging the US economy. Just the 10% is damaging the US economy. Trump still thinks he can use it to raise some extra revenue and to act as leverage to get some extra things. And again, he's done that with the UK. The net deal, compared with when Trump was inaugurated, the US got the best end of the deal that he has with the UK. Now, yes, he wants, and maybe we want, a more comprehensive trade agreement. But, you know, if Trump sticks to his guns, and he might have to, because the agricultural lobby may insist on it, then we're probably not going to get anywhere with that because, you know, food standards. But there we go. What's the general consensus on Trump's health? While narcissism is unhealthy, one can still reason with a narcissist. If you're hoping he'll just keel over, I wouldn't put any hope in that at all. I mean, despite the fact he's got clear cognitive decline, and yes, it's fairly obvious he's not like super fit. I mean, Biden famously had one of those thingy bikes. What are they called? Can't remember. But, you know, where the sort of... In fact, there was a security issue over it because it, like, links up on the net. A bit like, you know, I have, like, a, whatchamacallit, VR headset that does the same thing. So you do exercises on that. So, you know, Biden, you know, had his exercise regime. Trump, I mean, it's not that he has no exercise. He plays golf. I mean, you walk around and you whack a ball around a field. But there we go. So, but the other thing is, like, he has the best Peloton. Thank you. Yeah, that was it. So Trump's not into that, but he does have the best medical care. He like most of us, if we live in a country with a healthcare system, then if we notice symptoms, we'll go to the doctor. The NHS has been badly damaged. You don't necessarily get a good diagnosis. It is going to be better. But, you know, generally speaking, if you've got a decent healthcare system, you go to the doctor with symptoms, they'll investigate it, find out what it is, treat it. With Trump, he will be having checks all the time. Because, like, rich man's medicine is you don't wait for symptoms. You know, you have scans all the time. So there's a very good chance when you're that wealthy that the doctor finds out there's something wrong with you before you ever know what there is. Completely different way of doing it. So I really would not anticipate that Trump will... he could go for another 10 years, couldn't he? Trump's dad was 93 when he died. Trump's dad, to be fair, did look a bit... Unless he was probably fitter. But either way, it doesn't matter, does it? Yeah, mentioning there, Trump's never drank or smoked either. Yeah, I mean, he likes his burgers, but yeah, I mean, it's not like he there are some aspects of his life that are perfectly healthy. And like I said, he's got the best medical care, so no. Yeah, more doctors than a medieval king. Quote to Russell Howard. The thing is, I mean, they're also better. I mean, of course, the famous in medieval times, the thing with Henry VIII, of course, was there was one thing his doctors wouldn't do for him. So when he knackered his leg, when he like fell off a horse and the horse basically crushed his leg was basically dead. Apparently you could smell him coming a mile off because his leg was literally rotting. It just smelt like death. It was necrofying flesh. And so the obvious thing to have done would be to amputate. But none of the royal surgeons dared do it because obviously amputation carried a risk of death. And if you killed the king, you would be following very shortly. And you would probably not die well. You would probably be tortured before you died. But anyway, yeah. But if we are talking about succession, I mean, there will have to be talk of succession. It's got nothing to do with Trump's health. Playing about with things. In all likelihood, Trump is probably not going to be president after his current term. So his best bet is to try and arrange for a MAGA succession. And who would that be? Yeah, Vance doesn't have the charisma. So who would he get? That's the trick for them. So although America is in a very dark place, and I think it really is in a very dark place. And he's going to get darker because you look at what's happened in 6 months and you think like, there's a year and a half before anything can happen. Because even after the next year's elections, remember, there'll be a period of time before the new Congress or any new members of Congress are confirmed. So there could be a period of time where Trump knows he's going to lose his majority and his behaviour could get way more extreme. Right? So America is in a very, very dark place and it's not going to come out of it for a while. But it is not entirely hopeless because the midterms could well still, it may be that he cannot stop the midterms clipping his wings. And then after it, what does he do then? He can't run again unless he literally takes over America. And if Congress isn't on his side at that point in those last 2 years, what does he do? What does he do? Who's he going to put up? Because his backing alone, remember, he only just won. I mean, let's think about it. Like in terms of the popular vote, he did win it, but it was sort of, although the result was confirmed very quickly, it was also quite close in many ways, much closer than he would have been comfortable with. And think about what he was up against. He was up against Kamala Harris, who did not have long to prepare a campaign. I still worry that America is still too misogynistic to elect a woman president unless her opponent is like properly knackered. I think if they'd have got an all-American white bloke in his 50s with shiny teeth, then Trump may well have lost. And, you also think that the Democrats' campaign in general just, it didn't focus on the right things. It made the Brexit referendum mistake. It focused on the damage that would be caused by Trump, not the good times that they would deliver. It was what went wrong with the Brexit referendum. That's what the debrief said about it. It's like, and amazing to me that the Democrats, with all their money, don't analyse things, campaigns around the world and go, well, what worked and what didn't, what can we learn? Because if they'd have learned from our 2016 Brexit referendum, what they would have learned is warning that voting a particular way will cause lots of damage doesn't really sell it to the public unless you twin it with how voting for you is going to be like sunshine and unicorns. Trump won because of Biden's failure to stand down early. Harris did very well despite a 4-month campaign. Yes, but the campaign itself was still wrongly focused. I mean, that was a Democrat issue more than just hers. She didn't have enough time. But it also could be that they just got Biden, absolutely. I mean, Biden should never have tried a second term. I thought when he won that the understanding was he would not seek a second term. And then when you found out later, it came as no surprise, but when you found out later that people were covering for Biden's own decline, it was like, that was just stupid. That was just storing up trouble for later. But anyway. So the other thing I want to talk about in terms of another little bit of reality that's colliding with Trump, because the tariffs are a reality that's already collided with him. I don't believe he's going to whack up tariffs on everyone, especially not the major markets to America, because he can't wear it. He can't ride it out. He cannot survive it. I would be very surprised if the tariffs as stated this weekend are applied on the 1st of August. And I would be bloody amazed if they're still in place by the end of August. I would be absolutely gobsmacked if they're still in place at the end of August. But I would actually be very, not just mildly, very surprised if they even make it to 1st of August. But another bit of reality that's collided with him recently, have you noticed with the Texas floods? So he's been touring the damaged parts of Texas, of course, making big promises about aid and stuff like that, in a way that he never will with Democrat voting states. But he's had to, first of all, deny a couple of things, because there's a suggestion. It's like, okay, well, the floods were going to happen anyway, right? The floods were floods. But how deadly something like that needs to be is all about early warning systems. Well, DOGE cut the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the National Weather Service. So Trump has had to deny that those were factors in not the floods happening, but how deadly they were. I don't think his denial was very committed. But I also noticed this. I've seen reports that they're going to be reversing some of those funding cuts. And it's like, so it's like you're saying, oh no, those cuts have got nothing to do with this, but we're going to reverse those cuts anyway, which is interesting. You mean from the weather weapons Marjorie Taylor Greene's proposed to legislate against? Yeah, I don't. In all honesty, I get that Marjorie Taylor Greene might be entertaining to some people really into their American politics in the same way that Liz Truss is in Britain. But I try to listen to her as little as possible, in all honesty. She may, yeah, I think she exists for entertainment value. Who's popping there saying he's had to go to Texas because those kids that are missing belong to very influential and rich US family politicians and lawyers. Well, yes, it would be interesting to see if he would have gone under normal circumstances. But again, like I said, he's had to deny that his cuts led to more deaths than might have otherwise been the case, at the same time as I gather announced that they'll be reversing some of those cuts. Capable Globe was also adding to that sentiment. I have a lot to say on Texas, but that area, Kerrville, is a very rich area, so money will get a response, whereas Arkansas, Kentucky and West Virginia have not over the last 6 months. Isn't Kentucky the place where that former speaker was? What was his name now? I can picture him. He looks like a lizard. Forgotten his name now. He was bog useless, wasn't he? He was like senator for like two or three decades or something. And one of the poorest parts of America, and did nothing for them. God, what was his name? Yeah, Kentucky's very poor. And yet it kept voting for a Republican who did nothing for them. Mitch McConnell, that was it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I can picture his face. Yes, he did nothing for them. And they still voted for him. Why did they still vote for him? Not Ron Paul. I don't think he looks like a lizard either. We have county commissioner meeting recording of how they turned away infrastructure money in 2021, 2022 that would have paid for that warning system. Really? Oh. No, not Newt Gingrich, although he does look a little like a lizard. Those in Texas are saying that the floods were God's will and those who died were chosen by God to ascend to heaven. Oh, dear God. Really? I don't know why I'm surprised. I knew there had to be a reason they kept voting Republican. When did Phil parrot David Icke? Well, no, I don't. I'm not saying they're lizard people. I just said they had certain reptilian features. I don't believe they're actual lizards. One of the poorest wards in my country is in my area, and it kept voting Tory. Sometimes, though, or do you mean for the council? That would be weird. Because sometimes you can have a poor area that's Tory and you think, well, why does it keep voting Tory? And it's usually something else. Like near me, you've got Gainsborough, for example. Now, Gainsborough's poor. It's a little town and it's surrounded by much bigger towns. So those bigger towns always suck in the investment. Gainsborough's sort of middle of nowhere, but also in the centre of towns that are and towns and cities that are much more likely to take investment. So Gainsborough, does quite badly. It's a very poor area, and yet it's conservative, and it's been conservative since day one. Well, for a very long time anyway. Their MP is the person I call the human beetroot. But it's not that people in Gainsborough vote Tory, because they don't. They actually vote Labour. But the Gainsborough constituency includes a load of rural areas surrounding it. So it's not Gainsborough that votes Tory, even though Gainsborough, because it's like Gainsborough plus surrounding rural areas that do traditionally vote Conservative. Who's popping there saying people who live there are probably all farm workers? Well, I don't know at this point whether you're talking about Kentucky or anywhere else in America or anywhere in Britain, because indeed that is the case everywhere, isn't it? Or everywhere in the US and the UK, I think. Wherever you've got a rural area, even if it's poor, it's going to vote for their equivalent of the Conservative Party. Because, that makes sense. As Voltaire said, the tragedy of people is that they cling to the chains of their misery. Yes. Voltaire had a few quite good things to say. Mitch McConnell does not look like a lizard. You mean it looks like a tortoise, Phil? No, he ain't got a shell. We have a gecko. It's not dissimilar, Anyway, I'm not picking on like people's appearance. I just couldn't remember who it was, and he just reminds me of a lizard. That's all. But yeah, so I mean, you also wonder now, is Trump going to rethink some more of the DOGE cuts, given that they didn't save anything anyway, and if all they're going to do is make him deeply unpopular. I mean, imagine if something happened in next year. Let's say something happened next summer as you're building up to the midterms, and a tragedy where the tragedy itself will not necessarily be linked to DOGE cuts, but where the excessive deaths are linked to DOGE cuts. Could you imagine that in a Republican state? Because it's not like it's only the democratic states that have natural disasters. I mean, there's plenty. I mean, I still couldn't believe it. What's going to happen if a hurricane really does a lot of damage in Florida? Because part of those cuts to the weather service make it very difficult to predict hurricane paths now. Pronate said, I remember fighting with a local farmer in 2021 because I refused to buy something with the not for EU label, or not for EU, even if it was British farmed goods. I'm not that extreme. I mean, because I know, just to be clear, it doesn't mean the not for EU, I'm sure you know this because you've seen my videos, but the not for EU label is, it doesn't mean it's lower standards than the EU. It doesn't mean it doesn't meet EU standards. It just means that whoever's selling it hasn't arranged the paperwork because it's hassle. Why would you? The only reason you would arrange that paperwork is if you wanted to export it to either the EU or Northern Ireland. However, Purinator, you could have been in trouble if the Tories had stayed in power, because they did a deal with the DUP whereby everything would have to have the not for EU label on it effectively. Because in order to make it, to get everyone, yes, they were going to have to do that so that they could sell to Northern Ireland, because there are some small suppliers. Like if you're a big supplier, if a Northern Irish chain of shops orders some sausages from a producer in England, say, then it's a big order. They'll go through the process of getting the not for EU label stuff done, right? And ship them off to you. But if you've got a small supplier who just supplies some niche stuff, it's not worth the while, the extra production costs. So they won't do it. So they did a deal. So everything would have had to have the not for EU labels on it. Unless, of course, they were also exporting to the EU, in which case they had the paperwork, didn't need the label. So then you might have starved. But I don't think that's happening now. Pren's there saying, yeah, I know that's what it means. I do it tomorrow and make a statement. Brentry is coming. I'm not that pedantic. If a farmer's selling something that I like the look of, then I am buying it. There is quite a nice farm shop. It's not near me, but it's a reasonable drive away. Other side of Gainsborough, actually, near Lincoln. And unlike Jeremy Clarkson, they don't feel the need to charge 200 quid for a pork pie either. So it's actually, for what you get, reasonable money. And it's quite good. Reform UK government would mean the civil service would experience mass redundancies. I do not even know, in all honesty, what would happen with the Reform UK government, because I'm still not sure that Nigel Farage really wants to form a government. So there's a difference, isn't there? Are they working on an evil scheme because they think they can and they're trying to do it? Or would they find themselves surprise winners and not have a clue what to do? In which case, do not know what would happen. Blame Henry VIII for Brexit. He started the ball rolling. I don't know. Really. I mean, he didn't. I mean, it was quite de rigueur for English kings at the time to declare war on France. Anyway, like we were always fighting them. And all he did was break with Rome. I don't mind that. I'm not really, I'm not a Catholic. I'm not necessarily sure I'd have liked the country to remain Catholic. I'm quite happy, even though I'm Christian, for it to be secular. So, although Henry VIII was hardly motivated by nobility, the trajectory ended up being not too bad for us at all. What's your timescale for the UK public to see obvious improvements in their lives due to Labour policy? All this talk of 10 years of renewal is up in smoke. Should reform win the next election? Yeah, absolutely. They've got to win the next one. Yeah. We will see. Because Labour, we won't have another 2 years to wait to see how Labour intend to sell things to the public. In fact, this time next year, we should have a pretty good handle on what Labour are doing, because we're on the precipice at the moment after this first year. The Employment Rights Bill is almost through Parliament, but not quite. The Renters' Rights Bill is almost through Parliament, but not quite. So in another year's time, this time next year, not only will the Employment Rights Bill be law, but because remember, some of the provisions there's like an implementation period for businesses, but the first load of them come into place straight away, so that'll be this year, presumably either this month or September, I guess, depending on when it passes through. But the first major lump of new workers' rights comes online next spring. So this time next year, the NHS should hopefully be better. Provably, I mean, already provably better, but that progress should have escalated. We should start to see building of some of these community centres, I would hope. We're supposed to have quite a lot of them in place, about 1,000 in place by 2020 or in 2027. So we should start to see some of these community centres popping up next year. We'll start to see these workers' rights being actually implemented next year, the renters' rights as well. So then we will see how Labour champion them. So so this time next year, if Labour are still not able to get through to people the stuff they've done, then they are absolutely going to have to completely rethink their strategy. Because this time next year, there will be very, very tangible improvements that will affect millions of people. I mean, yeah, the Employment Rights Act, as it will be, is not going to be an instant boon to every worker in the country, because first of all, some workers, many workers, work for employers who already treat them well anyway. Some of the provisions are for like later in your life. So in terms of businesses having to have a menopause plan, well, if you're a woman but you're not going through the menopause, that's not of much value to you in the next couple of years. So there's but it will still affect millions of people. It'll benefit millions of people. So will Labour be selling that? So we could see this time next year Labour really starting to lean into the things that they've now delivered. Because at the moment, you know, when I'm doing on my videos, I'm still talking. There are some things they have done, right? In terms of water companies, in terms of the NHS, but it's slim. If I am trying to demonstrate to people, because at the moment I'm still mostly saying Labour have this policy or they've got this legislation and this is what it's going to do, but I can't yet say this is what it's done. In a year's time, I will be able to say that. Will Labour be saying that? If they are, then we could be looking at a much more positive outlook here. Vince there saying United claiming Labour's deserting the workers because of Brum bin dispute, ignoring the legislation. There, absolutely. I mean, I talked about this in my stream yesterday, my lunchtime stream yesterday. They're funny bunnies, Unite. I mean, if I always say, you know, always join a union. If Unite are the prominent union in your workplace, then join them. But they're a funny crowd. Rob saying housing is a measure. Excuse me. Well, here's the thing, right? So they promised 1.5 million new homes, right? 1.5 million new homes. And in theory, that's an average of 300,000 a year. Now, they obviously couldn't get straight to 300,000 a year because it needed more than ministerial pens, although there was a bit of that. Angela Rayner and Ed Miliband were both pushing their own projects through. But, I say their own projects within their department's purview, I should say. Other people's projects. But they needed their planning reforms. So again, next year, if you're going to say we wouldn't have got to the 300,000 immediately, it'll have to ramp up, then what you're saying is that in the last few years, it'll have to be more than 300,000 new homes a year being built. So, yes, we should next year, 2026, we should start seeing a lot more building. People should, in their local areas, see more building projects. In fact, there's supposed to be whole new towns going to be created, not like straight away, but you know. So the building should certainly be underway. And I absolutely agree that this time next year, Labour should also be able to start talking about progress on housing targets. Because they can't like just leave it all to the last year and say, tell you what, we're going to build 1 million this year, because that's not happening. On to UK stuff. What do you think we can expect from Reeves' speech on Tuesday, hoping for the one-pot pension reform? She's keen on her pension reform. I gather there were a few things she was going to be announcing, I think, wasn't there? I saw, and it was in the Telegraph, I believe, so you never know. But she was planning on restricting the benefits of like generic cash ISAs, which I don't mind at all. I think the idea was she wanted to encourage people to invest. I mean, like, for example, I put money not in a cash ISA, I put it in an investment ISA. It is better on the long term. Even with Trump's monkey business, I'm up on the deal. I'm better off than if I'd have put it in a cash ISA. And, you know, what you make in that is also tax-free. But, yeah, I think I heard a report that there's been a backlash and she looks like she's backing down from that now. This is the problem. You know, some of Reeves is having to actually stop quite a few economically sensible policies. Like cash ISAs, by the way, are like if it's an ISA for a specific purpose, you know, like an ISA for your deposits, you know, like a first-time buyer ISA or an investment ISAs. They make sense. They're tax breaks that reward something that is beneficial. cash ISAs reward you for not spending your money. Do you know what I mean? The money's not really being put to great use, other than it's the same use if you put it into like any bank account, really, isn't it? So I get how having a tax break for a cash ISA that doesn't do anything is not great for the economy. But the problem is, policies like that, Reeves is finding it difficult to enact certain policies that would be good for the economy because Labour's credibility is so low. They just can't afford to piss off too many key voters. But there we go. Wanga Peg and they're saying, don't underestimate how much good community centres and Best Start will do for many poor households. My family benefited massively from community centres and Sure Start when I was growing up. Yes, they will. And that's why, as I say, I was quite pleased when Bridget Phillipson announced that be 1,000 of them, not necessarily by 27, but by the end of 2027, I think, is what she said. So that means we've basically got 2 years and there should be loads of... And if Labour have got any brains, they will put them, and they'll be totally justified in this, by the way, they will put them first in the most deprived areas. And do you know what's interesting about the most deprived area? Parts of England, obviously, Scotland has their own thing, and Wales, and Northern Ireland. And this is in England. So the thing about those very deprived areas is they are the key battlegrounds between Labour and Reform UK. So this is not pork barrel politics like the Tories did, because it actually makes sense to put them in the most deprived areas, but it will work politically. Maybe not Cornwall. Some will inevitably end up in Cornwall because that's deprived as well. Labour aren't winning those seats. But you don't want to be too obvious anyway, do you? And if you've got put one in Clacton, the local MP won't visit it. No, don't put one in Clacton. Under no circumstances put one in Clacton. I think, right, I'm not a fan of dirty politics. I'm not a fan of dirty politics. But I am going to say there is, you sometimes have to fight fire with fire. I wouldn't mind at all, or put it this way, if I were Prime Minister, I would give serious consideration when these community centres start popping up and I'm going around saying how great they are. And if people say, why, when are we getting one in Clacton? I said, well, in due course, they'll be in every community. But, we're putting them first in the communities of the MPs who appear to give a shit about their constituents. That is what I would seriously consider saying. I would have to have all my advisors tell me no before I would not do that. Because that's what I would say. I wouldn't say I'm not putting them in any Reform UK areas. I would specifically say, because I'd be able to point, I'd say, look, that's a Lib Dem area, that's a Tory area, they're all getting them. But I'd put them in areas where their MPs have asked for them. That's what I would say. I would say, look, show me that you are serious about helping your communities and I will prioritise you. Cornwall gets what it votes for now. Well, did they vote for Six Fingers? Because there's a lot of that going on in Cornwall. I'm only joking. But there we go. Phil for PM, yeah, it would never work because, first of all, I'm not an MP, and I would never get enough support. But do you know what? I think I would have one skill that I think would be useful as a Prime Minister. That I reckon I could completely deflate Nigel Farage. I'd go full Yorkshire mode. I'd have a press conference every day, Downing Street, every day that I'm there, because sometimes out the country, right? I will admit I may not have played Trump as well. I mean, I'm perfectly happy with it. I would have tried to follow the strategy. Whether I'd have ever come across well with Trump, I don't know, in honesty. But I reckon I would have the measure of Farage. I'm not saying Reform UK wouldn't be a threat with me. That would be a ridiculously egotistical thing to say. But I do reckon that I would be able to prick him. But anyway. Phil to replace McSweeney. I'm not living in London. Also, I really honestly wouldn't know how to be a chief of staff. I'm not convinced he does. but I certainly don't. They should just get a proper one, an experienced one. Your chief of staff shouldn't even be your political advisor. They shouldn't be giving you political advice. I mean, obviously they're going to have their say, but that's not the job of a chief of staff. They're there to marshal everyone else. They're your butler. You know, you don't ask your butler what to have for dinner, right? They just manage it. You tell them and they manage it. That's the job of chief of staff. But there it is. Anyway, we're out of time. They're saying, John, they're saying, if I were PM, I would have sent troops to Ukraine before the full-scale invasion. Well, this is going back a bit now. You can't. You've got to work within NATO. But I would, if this could be back before 2014, I would certainly be going, why aren't we kicking these bastards out? Yes, being PM involves dealing with people. I pass. Yeah. It does a bit. In all honesty, it does. If I were PM, I'd tell Charlie to get the tower ready for the Brexit treasoners. No, I wouldn't. I would tell him to get ready for land tax reform, though, because I would be pushing land tax reforms. There would be no, land would be taxed inversely proportionally to its usefulness to society. So if you've got sprawling lands that are used as grouse moors, sorry, you're paying top dollar for that. You can have it. It's not illegal. But you're going to be paying through the nose for it. That's what I would do. But anyway, Vince said, Phil is posh Yorkie with a butlet. Butlet. No. What was I now? I am from the posh part of Yorkshire, though, from Doncaster. It's nearly not in Yorkshire. It's pretty much as far south as you can get and still be in Yorkshire. Further south, you're in Lincolnshire. So it is sort of posh-ish. The part of Doncaster I came from is not horrendously posh. There are posh pockets in Yorkshire. You know, you've got like Beverley and places like that. But anyway, there it is. Right, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of evening. I'm going to open the windows and vent overnight. Keep yourself cool. Wet socks, remember, I keep getting told by Australians, wet socks if it's unbearably hot at night. But have a great night. Until next time, I'll see you later.